She had traveled 3 days to reach this valley. She arrived with everything she owned and no idea what was waiting for her. 3 riders had her surrounded, and she stood there still dawning, like she had already decided something. Then a shot broke the dark wide open. He came out of the dark with a rifle and 1 word, and somehow died. That was enough.
She didn't know his name. She didn't know whose side he was on. She only knew that whatever happened next, everything was about to change.
She didn't scream when the riders circled her in the dark. She was done screaming. 3 days on a stagecoach from St. Louis. Everything she owned packed into a single trunk. And now this. Horses breathing steam into the night air. Men with rifles grinning down at her like she was something they'd already decided to take. Clara Ashworth pressed her back against a pine tree and thought, so this is Montana. Then a shot cracked the dark wide open. The rider fell from his saddle before the echo had died in the trees. The second man yanked his horse sideways, eyes scanning the darkness. The third one, the one who'd been reaching for Clara's arm, let his hand drop like he'd touched fire. Nobody moved, then footsteps. Slow, deliberate. The kind that weren't in a hurry because they didn't need to be. A man stepped out of the tree line with a rifle resting easy across one arm, the barrel still trailing a thread of smoke. He was tall, not in the showy way of men who wanted you to notice, but in the way of something built by weather and hard years. Hat pulled low, jaw set, eyes moving from one rider to the other like he was counting a debt. Ride, he said. 1 word. No raised voice, no threat attached to it. He didn't need one. The 2 remaining riders exchanged a look. Then they gathered their horses and went, pulling the riderless animal behind them, leaving only the sound of hooves fading into the pines and the slow return of crickets. Clara realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out. The man didn't look at her right away. He watched the tree line, studied the trail the riders had taken, waited 10 full seconds like he expected them to come back. When they didn't, he finally turned. His eyes were dark, careful, the kind that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. You hurt? He asked. Clara pulled herself upright from the tree. Her dress was torn at the sleeve. Her hands were shaking, though she pressed them flat against her skirts so he wouldn't see it. No, she said. I'm fine. He looked at the torn sleeve. Said nothing. I said I'm fine. Yes, ma'am. He turned back toward the trees. Stagecoach is half a mile back. Left wheels broken clean off. Driver ran. I know. I was there. He moved past her toward the road. Town's 4 miles east. You can walk or you can ride. Up to you. Clara looked at him, at his back, at the rifle still loose in his hand. I don't know you, she said. He stopped walking, didn't turn around. No, ma'am. He said, you don't. A long pause. The wind moved through the pines overhead. Cole Merritt, he said at last, still not turning. I work cattle in these mountains. I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm also not going to stand here all night convincing you of it. He started walking again. Like I said, up to you. Clara stood in the dark for 3 full seconds, thought about the riders, thought about 4 miles of Montana wilderness with no weapon and no lantern, thought about the look in that third man's eyes before the shot. She followed. His horse was a big gray animal, broad-backed and calm, tied to a pine at the edge of the road. Cole untied it without ceremony and looked at Clara with a question he didn't bother to voice. I can ride, she said. Never said you couldn't. He helped her up with one hand at her elbow, quick, impersonal, already letting go before she was fully settled. Then he took the reins and walked, leading the horse on foot. Clara watched the back of his neck. You can ride too, she said. There's room. I know. He kept walking. She stopped trying to make conversation. The moon was high and the road was pale beneath it. They moved through the dark in silence, just the soft blow of the horse's breath and the crunch of Cole's boots on the dry summer earth. The heat was still thick even at this hour, the way Montana summers could be close and dry and smelling of pine resin and something faintly wild underneath. Clara watched the tree line, watched the shadows. Those men, she said finally. Who were they? Trouble, I gathered that. Do you know them? A pause. Seen them around. Working for someone? He glanced back at her over his shoulder. Just once. You ask a lot of questions for a woman who just rode in. I'm a teacher, Clara said. It's a professional habit. Something shifted in his jaw. It might have been the beginning of a smile. She couldn't tell in the dark. Teacher, he said. From where? St. Louis. I have a contract with the school in Copper Falls. I start Monday. Copper Falls, he said it flat. No particular feeling in it. You know it? He asked. Know of it. He said nothing more. Clara decided to let that go for now. The town of Copper Falls sat in a wide valley below the mountain range, and at midnight it looked like a painting of itself. The main street lantern lit, the saloon still spilling piano music into the warm air, the white church at the far end standing quiet against the stars. Smaller than Clara had imagined, quieter, but prettier too in the way that wild things could be pretty. Cole walked her to the front steps of the only hotel and stopped. Copper Falls Hotel, he said. Mrs. Aldred runs it. She'll have a room. Clara slid down from the horse. Her legs were steadier now. She smoothed her skirts, pushed her hair back from her face, and turned to look at him properly for the first time in full light. He was younger than she'd thought in the dark. Or maybe not younger, maybe just different. The hard lines of his face belonged to a man who'd been outside in all weathers for a long time. But his eyes, now that she could see them, weren't old eyes. They were watchful eyes, eyes that held something back. "Thank you," she said. "Mr. Merritt." He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am," turned the horse's head. "Will I see you again?" She didn't know why she asked. It came out before she'd thought it through. He paused with his back to her. "Probably," he said, and rode away into the dark. Clara met Wade Hargrove the next morning at breakfast. He was already seated at the best table in the hotel dining room when she came down, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, silver at his temples with the kind of face that had once been handsome and had grown into something more than that, authoritative, warm, the face of a man comfortable with being looked at. He rose the moment she entered. Smiled like they were old friends. "Miss Ashworth." He extended his hand across the table. "Wade Hargrove. I own the cattle operation east of town and sit on the school board." His grip was firm and brief. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Clara sat across from him. A woman brought coffee without being asked. "You know who I am," Clara said. "Small town, Miss Ashworth. Word travels." He shook his head with what seemed like genuine regret. "I heard about the trouble on the road last night. I'm deeply sorry. That kind of thing isn't typical of our valley. Drifters. The territory's been seeing more of them lately." "The man who helped me," Clara said. "Cole Merritt. You said he works cattle." "He works for me." Hargrove poured her coffee himself, unhurried and gracious. "One of my best men. I'm glad he was there." Clara looked at her coffee. She thought about Cole's face in the lantern light, the one-word answers, the careful eyes. "He seems very—" She searched for the right word. "Self-contained?" Hargrove laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "That's generous. Most people just say he's unfriendly." He leaned back in his chair. "Merritt's had a hard run of it. His brother Daniel sick 2 winters back, lungs. Cole's been carrying the medical bills ever since. A man carrying that much weight doesn't leave much room for pleasant conversation." Clara filed that away. "I appreciate you introducing yourself, Mr. Hargrove," she said. "I'm looking forward to meeting the families and starting the school, and we're looking forward to having you." He smiled again, the warm, practiced smile of a man who had been charming rooms his entire life. "Copper Falls needs someone like you, Miss Ashworth, someone with conviction." He rose, buttoned his jacket. "If you need anything at all, my door is open." He left. The dining room seemed louder after he was gone. Clara sat with her coffee and thought about the word conviction and how different it had sounded in Wade Hargrove's mouth than it did in her own head. She spent that morning unpacking her trunk in the small room upstairs, hanging her dresses, stacking her books, pinning her teaching certificates to the wall above the writing table. It was a good room. Clean windows, a view of the mountains to the west, those blue-shouldered peaks cutting the sky in a way that made the Missouri flatlands seem like something from a dream she used to have. She liked it here. She hadn't expected to, but she did. She was out the door by noon. The school building sat at the east end of town, a single-room structure with a fresh coat of white paint and 8 wooden desks inside. Someone had swept it recently. Someone had left a small bunch of dried wildflowers on the teacher's desk. Clara stood in the empty room for a moment and felt something settle in her chest. This was why she'd come. This exact thing. She was measuring the blackboard when the door opened. She turned. A woman stood in the doorway, early 40s, sun-worn, with 2 boys at her sides and the unmistakable posture of someone who had worked hard for a long time without much recognition of it. She looked at Clara the way you looked at something you wanted to trust but weren't sure you could afford to. "Mrs. Holloway," the woman said by way of introduction. "My boys are Wyatt and Cal. They'll be in your class, Miss Ashworth." Clara held out her hand. The woman shook it with a grip that was brief but real. "I'm glad to meet you." The boys stared at her openly. Wyatt, the older one, had a bruise along his left jaw, old enough to be yellowing at the edges but still there. Clara didn't remark on it. She crouched down to their level and said, "Which one of you is the better reader?" Wyatt pointed at Cal. Cal looked mortified. Clara laughed, and that seemed to break something open because May Holloway's posture eased slightly and she said, "We heard good things about you from back in St. Louis. I hope they were true." May looked at her for a moment. Something passed behind her eyes. "Miss Ashworth," she said quietly, "you should know. There are people in this town who'll be glad you're here, and people who won't." She said it like she was warning Clara about weather, like it was just a fact of the landscape, just so you know going in. Clara looked at her steadily. "I appreciate the honesty, Mrs. Holloway." The woman nodded once, took her boys and went. Clara stood in the empty schoolroom and thought about what she'd said about the boys who needed teaching, about Wyatt's bruised jaw, about Wade Hargrove's smooth practiced smile. She found Cole Merritt by accident on her 3rd day. She'd gone south along the creek bed, looking for the Pemberton family, a farming household whose children hadn't enrolled, and the trail she'd been following dead-ended at a fence line she hadn't expected. She followed it east, thinking she'd find a gate, and instead found a man crouched over a length of cut wire with a pair of pliers and an expression like a thundercloud. He didn't hear her approach over the wind. Mr. Merritt. He looked up fast, the instinctive reaction of a man who spent time in country where surprises weren't welcome. Then his face settled when he saw her. "Miss Ashworth." He set the pliers down and stood. "You're off the trail. I was looking for the Pemberton place." Pemberton's 2 miles north. His eyes moved to the wire to the fence. You shouldn't be out here alone. I've noticed people keep saying that to me. She looked at the cut wire. Was it deliberate? He looked at her. A long, measuring look. 3rd time this month, he said finally. Somebody cuts the fence. Cattle drift south onto the open range. Somebody drives them off. He said it plainly, without emotion, which somehow made it worse. Silas Bowen lost 40 head last spring. Pemberton lost 60. 2 families that were doing fine this time last year are barely holding on now. Clara felt something cold move through her despite the heat. Who's driving the cattle off? He picked up the pliers. That's the question. Do you have an answer? He said nothing, just crouched back down and began working the wire. Clara crouched beside him. He looked sideways at her. You don't have to. I have 2 hands, Mr. Merritt. She held them out, steady and open. Show me what to do. He looked at her hands, at her face. Something shifted behind his eyes that she couldn't quite name. Hold this end, he said. Don't let it spring back. She held it. They worked in silence in the summer heat, the creek murmuring below them, the mountains watching from the west. It was strange, Clara thought, how easy silence could be with some people and how heavy it was with others. With Cole Merritt, it wasn't heavy at all. It was just the 2 of them doing a necessary thing and neither of them needing to fill it with words. Your brother, she said at last. Daniel. His hands didn't stop moving. Hargrove tell you about him? Yes. Then you know he's sick. I don't know much else. A pause. He twisted the wire ends together with practiced efficiency. 12 years younger than me, Cole said. Took our mother's lungs the same as she did. She made it to 51. He paused. Daniel is 26. The number sat between them. I'm sorry, Clara said. She meant it, without any of the polish people usually put on the phrase. He glanced at her. He's still alive, that's what matters. He stood, dusted his hands on his thighs. Pemberton Place is north along the creek. Stay on the east bank. You'll see the chimney before you see the house. He was leaving. Mr. Merritt. She stood. The wire. The missing cattle. The families losing their land. She watched his face. You know something. He stopped. Didn't turn around. The wind moved through the grass. A red-tailed hawk crossed the sky above the mountains in one long banking arc. Be careful, Miss Ashworth, he said quietly. This valley has a way of dealing harshly with people who ask too many questions. He walked away. She watched him go, the tall, unhurried figure moving south along the fence line, and felt the warning settle into her bones like weather. She went north toward the Pemberton place. She was going to ask the questions anyway. The town hall meeting happened on the following Thursday evening. Clara hadn't planned to speak. She'd planned to listen. She'd sat in the back row with her hands in her lap and her mouth closed for the better part of an hour, while Wade Hargrove stood at the front of the room and talked about grazing rights and land value and the territory's promising future, and the assembled ranchers and shopkeepers nodded along the way. People nodded at men who held their notes. But then Silas Bowen had stood up, hat in his hands, voice quiet, and said he couldn't make his payment this month. Couldn't make it next month either, most likely, and Hargrove had said with enormous warmth that he understood, that he always tried to work with his neighbors, that he had patience, that he only asked that Silas hold up his end of the agreement they'd signed in February. The agreement Silas had mentioned to Clara 2 days ago, the one he'd signed when the creek flooded his winter pasture and he'd had no choice. Clara stood up. She hadn't planned to. Her legs just did it. Hargrove looked at her with mild, pleasant surprise. Miss Ashworth, did you have a question? A few. Her voice was steady, which was strange because her heart was beating very fast. Mr. Bowen, what were the original terms of your agreement with Mr. Hargrove? Silas looked startled to be addressed directly. He glanced at Hargrove, then back at Clara. 30-day notice before any debt collection action, he said slowly, and a right of first offer if he ever decided to sell. The agreement you signed in February didn't include those terms, Silas. Hargrove's voice was still warm, still patient. I'm afraid you may be misremembering. I'm not. I have the signed document. We can review it together. He smiled at the room, a reasonable man dealing reasonably with the confusion. Miss Ashworth, I appreciate your interest in our community affairs, but these are contractual matters between private parties. 13 private parties, Clara said, in the past 8 months, all of whom signed agreements with you during emergencies, all of whom are now behind on payments, and 2 of whom, the Pemberton family and the Holloways, have had cattle go missing from fenced pastures 3 times each. The room had gone very quiet. Hargrove looked at her. The warmth in his face was still there, perfectly intact, but something behind his eyes had changed. Something had gone still and cold and absolutely focused. Those are serious observations, Miss Ashworth, he said softly. They're observations, Clara said. I haven't accused anyone of anything yet. She sat down. The meeting ended shortly after. People filed out in clusters of 2 and 3, not meeting her eyes. Silas Bowen gripped her hand on the way out and said, "Low and quick, thank you," and then looked frightened by his own gratitude and walked away fast. Clara stood outside the hall in the warm summer night, waiting for her heart to slow down. That was brave. She turned. Cole Merritt was leaning against the wall at the corner of the building, arms folded, hat low. She hadn't seen him at the meeting. She hadn't known he was there. "You were inside the whole time," she said. "You didn't say anything." "No." She looked at him. "You know I'm right." His jaw tightened. "I know you just painted a target on yourself in front of the most powerful man in this valley. I know that too." He pushed off the wall and came closer, close enough that she could see the worry in his face. Not for himself, she realized, for her. "Go back to St. Louis, Miss Ashworth," he said quietly. "Take the next stage east and don't look back. There are other schools, other towns. There are other children here," she said. "Wyatt Holloway has been coming to school with bruises for 2 weeks. 2 families are about to lose their land, and nobody in that room said one word about any of it except Silas Bowen, and he looked terrified the moment he did." She held Cole's gaze. "I'm not going back to St. Louis." He looked at her for a long moment. The night air was warm around them, thick with the smell of pine and dry summer earth. Then, quietly, not unkindly, he said, "God help you." He put on his hat and walked away into the dark. Clara watched him go. She thought about what Hargrove had looked like in that moment when the warmth went still behind his eyes. She thought about fences cut in the night, and cattle driven off, and families that had been fine one year and failing the next. She thought about Cole saying "God help you" with his back to her, and something in his voice had sounded less like a farewell and more like a promise. She walked back to the hotel alone. Tomorrow she would start asking the questions that no one wanted answered. She had a feeling Cole Merritt would be there whether she asked him to or not. And Wade Hargrove, the smiling man with the silver temples, stood at the edge of that same dark street, watching the schoolteacher's straight-backed figure disappear into the hotel. He stopped smiling. He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a folded piece of paper, and handed it without a word to the man standing at his shoulder. "Find out everything about her," Hargrove said. "St. Louis, her family, anyone she owes money to. Anyone she cares about." He buttoned his jacket and sent word to Sheriff Caulfield. "I want him here by Friday." He walked back toward the light, and Clara Ashworth, settling into her small hotel room with its mountain view and teaching certificates pinned neatly to the wall, had no idea that the most dangerous man in the Copper Falls Valley had just decided she was a problem that needed to be solved. Sheriff Caulfield arrived on Friday, just as Hargrove said he would. Clara was in the middle of a reading lesson when she heard the horses. She didn't stop teaching. She kept her voice steady, her eyes on the children, and finished the paragraph about the boy in the river. Only when she'd dismissed them for their noon break did she walk to the door and look out at the main street. 2 men, both on horseback, both wearing stars. The taller one had a face that had settled into its conclusions long ago and wasn't interested in revisiting them. He rode straight to Hargrove's office above the land company and didn't look at the schoolhouse at all. Clara watched him go. Behind her, Wyatt Holloway hadn't gone outside with the other children. He was still at his desk, turning his reader over in his hands, not reading it. "Wyatt." He looked up. "Do you know that man, the sheriff?" Wyatt's eyes went to the window, then back to his reader. "That's Sheriff Caulfield." A pause. "He came last spring, too, after Mr. Hendricks said something at the grazing meeting." Another pause. "Mr. Hendricks left town 2 weeks later." Clara kept her voice easy. "Left town or was made to leave?" Wyatt didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. She sent him outside, stood in the empty schoolroom, and thought about Mr. Hendricks and Sheriff Caulfield and Wade Hargrove's smooth, unhurried walk up those office stairs. Thought about how the machinery of a corrupt town worked, not with open violence, not at first, but with pressure. Quiet, patient, mounting pressure, until the inconvenient person decided on their own that somewhere else was a better idea. She was still thinking about it when Mrs. Aldred knocked on her hotel room door that evening and told her, with genuine regret in her voice, that she needed the room back. Clara stood in the doorway. "I've paid through the end of the month, I know." Mrs. Aldred couldn't quite meet her eyes. "I'll refund the difference." "I'm sorry, Miss Ashworth. I've got a family obligation. A cousin coming. She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I'm sorry," she said again. Clara looked at her, at the apologetic slope of her shoulders, at her hands twisting together at her waist. "Someone spoke to you," Clara said quietly. Mrs. Aldred said nothing. "Which was everything. All right." Clara kept her voice level. "I'll be out by morning." She packed her trunk, sat on the edge of the bare mattress, pressed her hands flat on her knees and breathed. This was how it started. She understood that now. She slept that night on a cot in the back room of the Holloway house, which May offered without hesitation and with a fierceness in her voice that made Clara feel unexpectedly like crying. "You'll stay here as long as you need," May said. She was a compact, straight-backed woman who moved like she was always slightly ahead of whatever came next. "Don't argue with me. I wasn't going to." May looked at her sharply, then, satisfied, went back inside. The room smelled of cedar and old quilts. Clara lay on the cot and stared at the dark overhead and thought about Mrs. Aldred's hands twisting together, about Wyatt's face when he'd said Mr. Hendricks left town 2 weeks later, about the way the room had gone quiet at the town hall when she stood up. She tested the feeling carefully, turned it over, examined it, and found something closer to anger than fear. The slow, clarifying kind of anger that settled into the chest like ballast and made you steadier instead of shakier. In the morning, she taught school. The first child didn't show up on Monday. The second was gone by Wednesday. By the following week, Clara had 7 students where she'd had 19. Their empty desks were not moved. She kept teaching to the 7 who remained. The Holloway boys, the Bowen girl, 4 others whose families either hadn't gotten the message or had chosen to ignore it. She taught them everything she knew. She worked harder than she'd ever worked. She did not remark on the empty desks, but after school on Thursday she rode to the Pemberton place and found Margaret Pemberton in the yard with a look on her face like swinging for a blow. "Miss Ashworth." Margaret wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm sorry about the children. They won't be coming back to school. May I ask why?" Margaret looked past her, down the road, back. "Edmund got a letter from the land office," she said, low and fast, like she was getting it out before she could stop herself. "They're saying the original deed has a filing error. They want him to come to the county seat and sort it out. But the county seat is 3 days' ride, and if he leaves now with the harvest coming..." She stopped. "It'll work out fine, I'm sure," she said louder now. The warmth gone out of it. Someone was watching. Clara didn't turn to look. "I'm sure it will," she said gently. "Tell the children I miss them." She rode back to town. She was 300 yards from the schoolhouse when a man stepped into the road in front of her. She didn't recognize him, broad through the chest, wearing a coat too heavy for the summer heat, hands hanging loose at his sides. "You're the school teacher," he said. "Yes, Mr. Hargrove thinks you'd be happier in a different town. He said it the way you'd say the weather was looking fair, conversational, easy. Thought I'd pass that along." Clara looked at him, at the coat, at where his hands were. "Thank you," she said. "I'll take it under consideration." She rode past him at a walk, kept her spine straight, didn't look back. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the school, but she got down from the horse and went inside and graded papers until they stopped. She found the first empty farm the next morning. The Morrison place was 4 miles east, a small homestead, 2 parents, 3 children, the youngest of whom, a girl named Rosie, had been Clara's most eager student. Clara had written ahead, thinking she'd check on them, bring a book for Rosie, maybe convince the parents to send her back. What she found was an open door and a cold stove. She went inside. The furniture was still there. The dishes were on the shelf. A pot sat on the stove like someone had set it down mid-step and walked out. She stood in the middle of that silent kitchen for a long time. Then she got back on her horse and rode. The Delacroix place was empty too. Smaller farm farther east. The garden was untended but still green. They hadn't been gone long. A child's shoe sat on the porch steps. Clara dismounted, picked it up, held it. They left 4 days ago. She spun around. Cole Merritt was sitting on the fence rail at the corner of the yard, one arm across his knee, watching her with the expression he often wore, the one that showed nothing but meant a great deal. "Where did they go?" Clara asked. "Don't know." Fast, wherever it was. He looked at the house. "Morrison family too, I reckon, from that look on your face. Why didn't you tell me? You were teaching school, Miss Ashworth." She crossed the yard toward him. She was angry and she let him see it. 2 families gone. No warning, no goodbye. Just gone. She stopped in front of him. "What is happening in this valley?" He looked at her for a long moment, then he climbed down from the fence. "Walk with me," he said. She walked, and he talked not the way he usually talked, in short, careful fragments, each one measured before it left his mouth. He talked like a man who had been holding something back for a long time and had just made a decision about it. Wade Hargrove had been in this valley for 14 years, Cole said. When he came, he was the 4th largest cattle operation in the territory. Now he was the largest by a considerable distance. He kept his eyes ahead on the mountains. The families that used to sit above him on that list were all gone. Most had sold. Some had left fast, like the Morrisons. One, a man named Garrett, who'd had the biggest spread in the Eastern Valley, had died in what the county recorded as a riding accident. 3 witnesses said his horse was fine, Cole said, his jaw set. Said there was nothing wrong on that trail. Clara walked beside him and listened. The land company held notes on most of the small farms in the valley now, he continued. Hargrove had been buying debt quietly for years, waiting. When he decided it was time for a family to move on, he found the number on their note, sent someone to the land office to flag a filing irregularity, cut their fence, drove off their cattle, sent a man to stand in the road. And if none of that works, Cole said, he finds other ways. "And you've known this?" Clara said it carefully. "How long?" He was quiet for a moment. "Long enough," he said. "And you work for him?" "Yes." "Why?" He stopped walking, turned to face her. The honesty in his expression was uncomfortable to look at, not because it was false, but because it wasn't. "Daniel's medical bills are held by Hargrove's land company," he said. "Same as the farm notes. If I walk away or cause trouble, he calls in the debt. And Daniel loses his care." He held her gaze. "I know what that makes me." "It makes you a man with no good options," Clara said. He looked at her like he hadn't expected that. "I've been trying to find evidence," he said. "Something I could take to the territorial marshal. Something that can't be explained away." He paused. "I need something concrete. One piece of solid proof. I want to help. No, firm, final." He started walking again. "You're already a target. You stood up at that meeting and said what nobody else would say. Hargrove has people watching you now." He glanced sideways at her. "The man in the heavy coat. Don't look surprised. I know about him." That was a warning. "I know it was a warning. Then you know the next thing won't be." Clara thought about Rosie Morrison's shoe on those porch steps, about Wyatt's bruises, about Silas Bowen gripping her hand outside the town hall and then looking frightened of himself. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm still not leaving." Cole made a low sound that wasn't quite a word. "Stubborn woman," he said. "Observant man," she said. There was a pause. Something almost like warmth moved across his face. "Just for a second. I'll look into the deed records," Clara said. I have a reason to visit the land office. School registration requires copies of property documentation. I can ask to see the original filing logs. They won't show you anything useful. They might show me what's been altered. She looked at him. I spent 4 years in a county seat school, Mr. Merritt. I know what official documents look like, and I know what they look like when someone's put a hand in them. He considered that. Don't go alone, he said finally. I won't ask you to go with me. I know what it cost you. I didn't say you had to ask. He looked ahead. Tuesday morning early. I'll be at the creek crossing. He walked back toward the fence without waiting for her answer. Clara stood in the empty Delacroix yard and watched him go and felt something settle between the anger and the grief, something steady and certain and surprisingly warm. She thought, not for the first time, that Cole Merritt was a great deal more complicated than a man who said very little. The land office was run by a man named Aldous Pritchett, who had the eyes of someone who had made a series of small, dishonorable choices over a long period of time and had learned to live with them by not thinking too hard about anything. He greeted Clara with cautious pleasantness and Cole with a look that lasted about half a second too long. Clara explained about the school registration. Pritchett relaxed slightly. He was comfortable with teachers wanting documentation, normal request, no threat. He brought the registration files and Clara went through them carefully, methodically, while Cole stood near the door and said nothing, and Pritchett watched them both from behind his desk, with the particular stillness of a man who wanted to seem unconcerned. The registration files were clean. Clara hadn't expected anything else. Hargrove wouldn't compromise that layer, but the registration files were cross-referenced to property deeds, and the deed index had to sit on the same shelf, right there, behind Pritchett's left shoulder in plain sight. While Clara was asking Pritchett a detailed question about the cross-referencing system, watching him turn to answer it, Cole crossed quietly to the shelf, ran his finger down the index spines, and stopped. He looked at one entry for approximately 3 seconds. Then he stepped back to the door. Clara wrapped up her question, thanked Pritchett with the warmth of someone who had gotten exactly what she came for and intended to hide it, and they left. Outside, walking toward the creek, Cole kept his voice low. Pemberton deed, he said, filed in March of last year. It's listed in the index as having a recorded lien from May of this year. He paused. The Pembertons were already gone by the time that lien was filed. Clara processed that. They backdated it, she said, or filed a lien on a property they'd already forced the family off of. Either way, it's not legal. Another pause. There were 3 other deed numbers beside Pemberton's with the same notation. Same month. Same hand. Whose hand? Cole looked straight ahead. Pritchett's. The weight of it hit Clara all at once. Not Hargrove's name on anything. Pritchett, a county official. Which meant this went further than one powerful rancher pressuring his neighbors. This was a system. This was constructed. That's why the marshal hasn't come, she said quietly. Hargrove isn't just buying land. He has people inside the county structure. Yes, so who do you report a corrupt county official to? Cole's jaw tightened. Territorial government, Helena. He looked at her. Which means someone has to get there without Hargrove's people knowing. And someone has to have proof, not just an index entry a judge could call a clerical error. He stopped walking. We need the original deed filings. We need something Hargrove can't walk back. He looked at her, and for the first time she heard something in his voice that was not controlled. Clara. He stopped. Said her name like he hadn't meant to. Like it had come out before he'd decided to say it. She waited. This isn't something we fix by asking the right questions anymore, he said. This is bigger than this valley. I know, she said. You should be frightened. I am, she said honestly, but frightened doesn't mean stopped. He looked at her for a long moment in the summer heat. The mountains behind him, the creek bright and indifferent below. Something in his face moved, not quite the warmth she'd seen before, but something deeper, something that had more weight to it. I have to tell you something, he said. She waited. Hargrove approached me 2 weeks ago, Cole said. Before your town hall meeting. He told me you'd be arriving and that you might be trouble. He asked me to report to him on what you said and who you spoke to. Clara went very still, and did you? Her voice was even. I told him you were a school teacher who minded her own business. His eyes didn't move from her face. That's the last thing I've told him about you, she breathed. I'm telling you now, he said, because you have a right to know what you're dealing with, and because. He stopped. Because, she said. He looked away toward the mountains, then back. Because I'm done, he said simply. With all of it. The debt, the silence, the fence mending for a man who cuts the fences. His jaw squared. I don't know yet what that costs, Daniel. But I'm done. Clara felt something open in her chest. Not the sentimental kind, the honest kind. The kind that happened when something true was said out loud for the first time. We'll figure out Daniel, she said. He looked at her sharply. There are doctors in Helena who don't work for Hargrove, she said. If we get to the territorial government, we get to resources he can't touch. She held his gaze. We figure it out. Cole stared at her. You barely know me, he said. I know enough, she said. I know you repair fences in the afternoon heat for families that aren't yours. I know you've spent months pretending to work for a criminal to protect your brother. I know you carry things quietly. And I know you're one of the only people in this valley who's decided to do something about what's happening here. She looked at him steadily. That's enough for me. He was quiet for a long time. The creek moved below them. All right, he said at last. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, without decoration, with the full weight of what it meant behind it. All right, Clara agreed. They walked back toward town side by side. That night, 3 things happened. The cot in the Holloway back room was the only place Clara had to sleep, and she was still awake at midnight when the light changed outside the window. She smelled it before she understood what it was. Smoke. Not wood smoke, not the pleasant kind, but the thick rolling kind that meant something was going wrong somewhere close. She was out the door in under a minute. The barn behind the Holloway house was fully involved. Fire climbing the walls, eating the roof, throwing light across the yard in great orange sheets. May was already outside with both boys pressed against her sides, arms around each of them, watching it go. Her face was completely still. There was nothing to do. The well was too far, the fire was too far along. They stood in the yard and watched the barn collapse in on itself with a sound like a held breath finally released. When it was over, when there was nothing left but the black skeleton of the frame and the smell of burned wood hanging in the warm night, May looked at Clara and said, very quietly, "My husband built that barn." Clara had no answer for that. She stood beside her and said nothing, because nothing was what the moment required. In the morning, Clara found a folded piece of paper wedged under the schoolhouse door. She read it once, set it on the desk, read it again, stay silent or the children pay next. She stood in the empty classroom for a long time. The 7 desks that still held students, the 12 that didn't, the dried wildflowers on the teacher's desk, going brittle at the edges now. Then she folded the paper, put it in her pocket, and went to find Cole. She found him at Silas Bowen's farm instead, or rather, she found the aftermath. Silas was sitting on the porch steps with his wife Margaret, kneeling beside him, her hands moving carefully over his face. He couldn't stand fully. His left eye was swollen shut. His lip was split in 2 places. No witnesses, no explanation that anyone in authority would write down. Clara stood in the Bowen yard in the gray morning light and looked at Silas's face, and felt the anger she'd been carrying shift into something harder and colder and more resolute. Hargrove was no longer just pressuring people. He was sending a message, and the message was meant for her. She looked up from Silas's face and found Cole standing across the yard, watching her with an expression she'd never seen on him before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was grief, the old, settled kind that had been living in a man for a long time and was finally finding something worth coming out for. He crossed the yard toward her. "I know where Hargrove keeps his records," he said quietly. "The real ones, not Pritchett's index. Hargrove's own ledger, the one that lists every deal, every threat, every dollar paid to every official in 3 counties. He stopped in front of her. He keeps it in a lockbox at the ranch house. East study, 3rd drawer." Clara looked at him. "You've seen it, once. 2 years ago, before I understood what I was looking at." His voice was flat. "It lists Daniel's debt specifically, with a notation beside it." He paused. "The notation says, 'Leverage maintain.'" The words landed in Clara's chest like stones dropped in deep water. "He never intended to let Daniel go," she said. "No, paying the debt wouldn't have freed us." She looked at him, at the grief and the steadiness, and the decision she could see had already been made before he crossed the yard. "Then we get the ledger," she said. He nodded once. "That's going to start a war," he said. "It's already a war," Clara said. "We've just been the only ones not fighting back." The morning light came up gold over the mountains and lay itself across the scorched ground where the Holloway barn had been. Somewhere in the valley, a hawk called once and went silent. And Cole Merritt looked at Clara Ashworth across the yard of a battered man's home, and something passed between them that neither of them put into words. They didn't need to. There was work to do. They planned it for 3 days and argued about it for 2 of them. Cole wanted to go alone. Clara refused. Cole said it was too dangerous. Clara pointed out that she was already sleeping in a borrowed room because Hargrove had pressured her landlady, that Silas Bowen was recovering from a beating with no legal recourse, that 2 families had vanished from their homes like smoke, and that a note had been left under her schoolhouse door threatening children. She said all of this in a voice so steady and so utterly without hysteria that Cole ran out of reasonable counterarguments and settled for unreasonable ones. "You don't know the ranch layout," he said. "You'll show me. You've never done anything like this, neither have you." He opened his mouth, closed it. "I've never broken into a man's house and stolen evidence of criminal conspiracy," he said finally. "Neither have I," Clara said. "But I've taught the American justice system to 40 students a year for 4 years, so I understand the principle." Something moved in his jaw that he was fighting very hard not to let become a smile. "Thursday night," he said. "Hargrove hosts his monthly dinner. Every county official he owns. Caulfield, Pritchett, 2 men from the Territorial Land Board. The ranch house will be full of people in the front rooms and empty everywhere else." He looked at her. "East wing, 3rd drawer. In and out in 10 minutes. Agreed. If anything goes wrong, anything, you run. You don't wait for me. You don't come back. You ride straight for the Holloway place and you don't stop." "Cole, that's not negotiable." She looked at him, at the set of his jaw, at the worry he was trying to wear as firmness. "All right," she said quietly. He nodded, looked away. "I'll get the horses." Thursday came in hot and still, the kind of summer night that sat heavy on the chest and made sounds carry farther than they should. They rode out at 10, when the dinner would be deepest into its second hour, Hargrove at his most expansive and his guests at their most comfortable. Cole knew the pattern. He'd attended enough of those dinners as the reliable hand in the yard, present enough to be invisible. They didn't speak on the ride out. There was nothing left to say that hadn't been said. Clara rode beside him and kept her breathing even and thought about Rosie Morrison's shoe on the porch steps. About Wyatt Holloway, who had come to school that morning and done his reading with a concentration so fierce it looked like defiance, which Clara had decided was exactly what it was. The ranch house was lit up against the dark like something festive and wrong. Music drifted from the main windows, laughter, the sound of men who believed they were safe. Cole tied the horses a quarter-mile out in the trees. They went the rest of the way on foot. The east wing was dark. The window Cole had described was unlatched. He'd seen to that 2 days earlier during his last required appearance at the ranch. Clara hadn't asked how he'd managed it without raising suspicion. She'd decided there were things Cole Merritt handled best without an audience. This had been one of them. He went through the window first, helped her through after her. His hands were quick and certain, and let go the moment she had her footing. The study was dark. Cole moved without hesitation. He'd described the room to her in such detail she could almost see it herself. Desk, bookshelf, left, cabinet, right, third drawer. She heard the soft protest of wood as he pulled it open. A pause, a longer pause. Cole. Her whisper was barely a sound. It's not here. 3 words. They landed in the dark of the study like something final and irreversible. Clara crossed to him. The drawer was open. She could see it even in the dark papers, a folded letter, the outline of a small cash box. But no ledger, no leather-bound record of 14 years of organized theft and coercion. He moved it, Cole said. His voice was flat, controlled. The control of a man who understood that the next 30 seconds required absolute steadiness. Could it be somewhere else in the room? He wouldn't keep it in the open. It was always the lockbox. His voice dropped further. Someone told him. The thought arrived fully formed and cold. Clara felt it land. He moved it because someone told him we were coming. Cole went still. From the hallway outside the study door, footsteps. Not the casual movement of a dinner guest looking for the washroom. Deliberate, measured, stopping directly outside the door. Cole had Clara by the wrist and moving toward the window before the door handle turned. She went through first, dropped into the dark below, landed and moved clear. He came through half a second behind her. They were flat against the exterior wall when the study light came on and a figure moved across the window above them. Neither of them breathed. The figure stood at the open window for a long moment, looking out into the dark. Then it moved away. They went through the trees at a fast walk that was almost a run. Cole's hand at Clara's elbow, not guiding so much as keeping the pace, and they didn't stop until they reached the horses and the cover of the pines. Clara pressed her back against a tree and breathed. Who knew? She asked. 3 people. Cole was already thinking. She could see it in that particular stillness, the way his mind moved fast when his body went quiet. You, me, and... He stopped. May Holloway, Clara said. She'd told May the broad shape of the plan. Not the details, but enough. Cole shook his head. May Holloway has more reason to bring Hargrove down than anyone in this valley. It wasn't May. Then who? He looked at her. I need to think. Right now we need to move. They know someone was in that study. They'll search the property. They rode north into the mountains, which was not the plan they'd made, and not any plan at all. Just the only direction that put distance between them and the ranch before Hargrove's men could saddle up. The summer night pressed close and the trail climbed, and Clara rode without asking questions, because Cole's back was straight and his pace was deliberate, and she had learned enough about him by now to know that was not the posture of a man without a destination. They rode for 2 hours. The ranch Cole brought her to was small, barely more than a cabin, with a good roof and a solid corral. An old man came to the door with a lantern and a rifle and a face that could have been carved from the same wood as the cabin walls. Cole, the old man said. No surprise in it, like he'd half expected this. Edgar. Cole dismounted. We need the back room. 2, maybe 3 days. Edgar Finch looked at Clara. His eyes were sharp and not unkind. You're the teacher, he said. Yes, sir. He lowered the rifle. Coffee's on. His name was Edgar Finch, and he'd been in these mountains for 30 years, which meant he'd been here before Wade Hargrove and intended to be here after. That alone told Clara something important about him. He poured coffee and asked no questions. When Clara thanked him, he said, Don't thank me. I'm 83 years old, and if I can't do what's right at 83, I wasted the previous 82. He went to bed. Clara sat at the small table with her hands wrapped around the coffee cup and let herself be shaken, for the first time since the study window, just for a moment. Just the internal acknowledgement that they had gone to steal evidence, found nothing, nearly been caught, and were now in a stranger's back room in the mountains with Hargrove's people about to discover someone had been in his house. She let herself be shaken. Then she put it away. We were anticipated, she said. That's a fact. We need to figure out how, and we need to find another way to the ledger. Cole was quiet across the table. There's something I didn't tell you, he said. She waited. Pritchett contacted me yesterday. He turned his coffee cup in his hands, said Hargrove wanted to offer a deal. Daniel's debt forgiven entirely, in exchange for... He stopped. In exchange for your cooperation in making me leave, Clara said. His jaw tightened. and my agreement to pursue no further inquiries into Valleyland matters. And you didn't tell me because you were considering it. The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. He's my brother, Cole said. It came out rough. Not an excuse, just a true thing said out loud. Clara looked at him across the narrow table in the old man's cabin, with the summer dark all around them, and felt the full weight of what this man had been carrying alone for 2 years. She didn't say anything soft or reassuring. He wasn't a man who needed softness right now. Did you give him an answer? She asked. Not yet. Then here's mine, since he apparently included me in it. She set her cup down. No, we don't take the deal. Not because I don't understand what Daniel means to you. I do. But because Hargrove will call that dead in again the moment it suits him, whether we made a deal or not. A man who uses leverage, maintain as a bookkeeping notation, does not release leverage. He just finds new terms. She held Cole's gaze. The only way Daniel is truly free is if Hargrove is finished. Cole looked at her for a long time, then he said, I know that. I've known it for a long time. He set his cup down. I just needed to hear someone else say it. She nodded. Then let's figure out where the ledger is. It was Edgar Finch, of all people, who gave them the answer. He came in the next morning with eggs and the casual air of a man who'd been thinking overnight and had arrived at something useful. He set the eggs down, poured himself coffee, and said, without preamble, Hargrove has a second property, north of the main ranch up the east fork of the Bitterroot Range. Old mining claim, been off the books for 15 years. He rebuilt the cabin on it 6 years back. Edgar sat down. I know because I watched him do it. You can see the roof from the ridge trail if you know where to look. He looked at Cole. If I had something I didn't want found, I wouldn't keep it where people knew to look. Cole and Clara exchanged a look. How far? Cole asked. Day's ride. Hard country. Can we get there without going back through the valley? Edgar studied his coffee. There's a high trail. Hunter's route cuts north through the pass. You'd come in from above, which is better anyway. You don't want to be riding up that canyon from the south. Too exposed. Edgar, Cole said, this puts you at risk. The old man waved his hand. I'm 83, son. Everything puts me at risk. Go eat your eggs. They ate their eggs. They were saddling up 2 hours later when Edgar came out and pressed a folded paper into Clara's hand. She unfolded it, looked at Edgar. Survey map, Edgar said. Old one, but the terrain doesn't change. He turned back toward the cabin. Hargrove bought out most of the original mining claim holders back in 1871, when he was first consolidating. I was the one who said no. He paused at the door, been waiting for someone with a reason to use that map ever since. He went inside and closed the door. Clara looked at Cole. Cole looked at the map. Let's go, he said. The high trail was everything Edgar had implied and more. The summer heat that pressed thick in the valley thinned as they climbed, replaced by the sharp, clean air of altitude and the particular silence of country where very few people went. The horses worked hard. The trail was narrow in places. Barely a trail at all, just a suggestion of direction in the rock and scrub. They stopped once to water the horses at a stream that came straight off the snowpack above, cold enough to ache. Clara's right leg had cramped badly enough on the descent into the stream bed that she went down on one knee when she dismounted. Cole caught her arm before she'd fully registered she was falling. I'm fine, she said by reflex. You always say that, he said, and I'm usually right. He kept hold of her arm until she'd straightened and nodded that she was steady. Then he let go, but not immediately, a half-second longer than necessary. Neither of them commented on it. They watered the horses and rode on. An hour below the pass, one of the horses threw a shoe. Cole dismounted, checked the hoof, stood up with an expression that said the situation was manageable and also deeply inconvenient. How bad? Clara asked. We can't push her on this terrain. She'll go lame. Then I walk. I'll walk, Cole said. You ride. Smaller load. Horse will be fine with one rider on this grade. We just go slower. So they went slower. Cole walked beside her horse, and the horse picked its way carefully. And Clara watched the set of his shoulders and thought about all the things he'd done in the past week alone that he hadn't mentioned or complained about. The evidence gathering, the deliberate misdirections to Hargrove, the fence repairs for families he didn't owe anything to. Cole, she said. He looked up. When this is over, she said. What do you want? He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. A piece of ground, he said at last. That's mine. Small enough to manage, big enough to matter. He kept walking, maybe cattle, maybe horses, something living and quiet. He looked at the mountains. That's enough. That's a good answer, she said. He glanced up at her, something warm in it. What about you? I want to keep teaching somewhere that needs it and knows it needs it. She thought about Wyatt Holloway reading with that fierce concentration. And I want to see Silas Bowen's children get what they're owed. And the Morrisons find their way back to this valley if they want it. And Rosie Morrison to have her reader back and a desk to sit at. Cole looked at her for a moment. You remember all their names, he said. They're my students. Some of them you only knew for 2 weeks. Doesn't matter. She looked down at him from the horse. They sat in my classroom and tried. That means I carry their names. He turned forward and walked and said nothing. But something in his posture had changed. A slight easing, a degree or two off the permanent tension he wore. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it. They reached the ridge above the mining cabin as the light was going gold. Cole went first, moving low along the ridgeline until he could see down. Then he came back to where Clara held the horses. "Cabin's there," he said quietly. "No horses in the corral, no smoke. Nobody's been here recently." He looked at the sky. "We go in now while the light's still with us." "Agreed." The cabin was spare. One room, cold stove, a cot, shelves with supplies. A place built for men passing through country, not for living in. Cole moved across the floor systematically, pressing, listening, looking for the particular give of a board that had been lifted and set back. He found it in 4 minutes. A shallow space beneath, barely deep enough for the box it held. He lifted the board, reached in and came up with a flat tin box sealed with a simple latch. He set it on the cot and looked at Clara. She opened it. The ledger was smaller than she'd imagined. 50 pages, perhaps 60. Dense handwriting, columns of numbers, names, dates. She turned to the first page and read. Her hands went still. She turned to another page, then another. "Is it what we need?" Cole asked. "It's everything," she said quietly. "Cole, it's everything. Garrett's death, the Morrisons, the altered deeds, payments to Pritchett going back 8 years, payments to Caulfield, 3 names from the Territorial Land Board." She looked up. "There's a notation about the Pemberton family specifically. It says they were," her voice went flat, "relocated under duress, with a date and an amount paid." The words hung in the air of the small cabin. "He kept records of his own crimes," Cole said, "in his own hand. Because he never thought anyone would find them," Clara said. "Because no one ever pushed back hard enough to look." They looked at each other across the small cabin in the fading light. "We need to move," Cole said. "If Hargrove figures out where we've," the horse outside screamed. Not the normal alarm of a startled animal, the shrill, raw sound of something suddenly and badly frightened. Cole was at the door before Clara had fully registered the sound. He pulled it open a crack, looked out and shut it hard and fast. "3 riders," he said, low, fast, no wasted words. "Coming up the south trail, armed, Hargrove's men." He crossed the room in 2 strides, pressed the ledger into her hands. North window, now. She already had it. They went through the north window into the cooling mountain air, and Cole took the ledger back and tucked it inside his coat, and they moved up the slope away from the cabin into the trees above it. Below them, the 3 riders reached the cabin. The door came open, voices, harsh and urgent, moving through the single room. Clara pressed against a pine and heard Cole breathing beside her, controlled, slow, focused. She matched her breathing to his because it was the only useful thing she could do. "Gone." A voice from below. "Recent, though. Look at the floor. They got the box." A different voice, colder. A silence. Then the cold voice again. "Fan out. They're on foot, up the slope." Cole's mouth was at her ear. "Run," he said. "Now. Don't stop." She ran. The slope above the cabin was steep and thick, and the going was brutal. Grabbing branches to pull herself up, boots slipping on the summer-dry ground, lungs burning in the thin air. Cole was behind her. She could hear him, and behind him she could hear the crashing of men coming up through the brush and the harsh calling of one to another. She didn't look back. The ridge came up faster than she expected. She crested it and almost went over the other side before Cole's hand caught her jacket and pulled her left, along the ridgeline toward where they'd left the horses. One horse was gone, cut loose or spooked, she couldn't tell which. The unshod horse was still there, tied hard and trembling. One horse. She looked at Cole, he looked at her. No discussion required. "Together," she said, and swung up without waiting. He was up behind her before she'd settled. His arm around her waist, the ledger pressed between them, and the horse lurched forward into the dark of the north slope. They rode hard and low, the horse carrying double, the trail poor, none of it mattering, because the alternative was the men with the cold voices coming over that ridge. Behind them, a shot. Then another, neither one close enough to matter. They kept riding. When the shooting stopped, when the sound of pursuit had faded into the general silence of the mountains, Cole eased the pace. Clara became aware of his arm around her, his warmth, the solidity of him at her back. The ledger pressed against her ribs through his coat like a second heartbeat. Neither of them said anything. The mountains held them in the dark, and the summer stars came out overhead the way they did at altitude, sharp and multiple and so close they felt like a condition of the air rather than a feature of the sky. After a long while, Cole said, "You all right?" "Yes," Clara said. A pause. "We have the ledger," he said. "Yes," she said. Another pause. "Daniel," Cole said. And something broke slightly in that word. Just slightly. Just at the seam of it, Clara understood. They had the ledger, which meant this was real now. Which meant Hargrove, whose hand had written every name in it, was about to discover that the evidence he'd hidden in the mountains had walked out of those mountains in the hands of a woman he'd tried to frighten away, and a man he'd tried to own. "Daniel will be fine," she said. Cole's arm tightened slightly around her waist. Not in response to the terrain. The terrain was smooth here. He didn't say anything, but he didn't let go. They rode through the mountain dark toward Edgar Finch's cabin, the ledger between them and the stars above them. And far below in the valley, a lamp came on in Wade Hargrove's ranch house. And a man who had never been stopped before finally understood that something had gone very wrong. And in a county jail cell that smelled of summer dust and old wood, a young man named Daniel Merritt coughed into the quiet and stared at the ceiling, and did not know that his brother was coming, did not know that everything was about to change, did not know that the woman riding through the mountains with Cole's arm around her had said his name like a promise she intended to keep. They reached Edgar Finch's cabin before dawn. Edgar was already up. He had coffee on and a lamp lit, and the particular calm of a man who had spent the night expecting bad news and was simply relieved it hadn't arrived in a worse form. He looked at them, at the dirt on their clothes, the horse lathered and spent, the ledger pressed under Cole's arm, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Sit down, both of you." They sat. Edgar poured coffee and set it in front of them, and then stood with his own cup and looked at the ledger on the table like it was a thing he recognized from a long time ago. "You got it," he said. "We got it," Clara said. Edgar nodded slowly. "Then it started." "It was already started," Cole said. "No," Edgar shook his head. "Before this, it was one powerful man doing what powerful men do when nobody stops them. Now it's a fight." He looked at Cole. "There's a difference. You understand that?" Cole looked at the ledger. "Yes." "Good." Edgar set down his cup. "Then you need to understand something else. By morning, Hargrove knows the ledger is gone and knows who took it. By noon, he knows you haven't come back through the valley. By tonight," he paused, "he'll do what cornered men do. He'll go for the thing that matters most." Cole went still. Clara watched the understanding move across his face, watched the color leave it. "Daniel," Cole said. "Daniel," Edgar said quietly. Cole was on his feet before the word had finished landing. Clara caught his arm. "Think," she said, fast and firm. "Think before you move. If you ride into that valley alone right now, Hargrove is expecting exactly that. He'll have men between here and the jail. He'll use Daniel to draw you out into the open, and then you'll both be gone. I can't leave him in there, Clara. I'm not saying leave him. I'm saying don't walk into the obvious trap." She kept her hand on his arm, felt the tension in it, coiled, barely contained. "We go together. We go with the ledger. We send a wire to the territorial marshal's office in Helena tonight, and we ride for the valley at first light." "There's no telegraph line up here," Edgar said. Silence. "How far to the nearest line?" Clara asked. "Ridgeway Station, 12 miles east." Clara and Cole did the same calculation at the same time. 12 miles of open country. Hargrove's men already looking. Daniel sitting in a county jail cell controlled by Sheriff Caulfield, who had 8 years of payments recorded in the ledger under Clara's hand. "We don't split up," Clara said. She said it before Cole could suggest it, because she could see the idea forming in his face. "That's not how this ends. If we divide, we lose one of the threads. We need both the wire sent and Daniel out of that cell before Hargrove makes his next move." Cole looked at her. "Then how?" Clara looked at Edgar. Edgar looked back at her with the measured expression of an 83-year-old man who had lived in the same mountains long enough to have accumulated a great many reliable acquaintances. "Edgar," she said, "is there anyone between here and Ridgeway you trust completely?" Edgar was quiet for a moment. "My nephew runs the Ridgeway station," he said. "Would he send a wire to Helena without asking questions? He'd send a wire to the president himself if I asked him to, and not say a word about it to anyone after." Clara looked at Cole. Cole looked at her. She watched him test it, pulling at the edges of the plan the way he tested wire, looking for where it would fail. "It's tight," he said. "Everything about this is tight. If Caulfield moves Daniel before we get there, then we find him, but we go together." She held his gaze. "I need you to trust me the same way I've been trusting you." He looked at her face, at something in her expression that had been there a long time and neither of them had named. Then he said, "All right." Edgar was already putting on his coat. His rider left within the hour, a young ranch hand named Percy who worked the upper pasture and asked no questions and rode like he'd been born on horseback. Edgar watched him go and said, with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what his people could do, "He'll be at Ridgeway before midnight." Clara and Cole slept in shifts, 2 hours each. Neither of them slept fully. It was a half rest that left you more aware of your own heartbeat than before, but it was better than the alternative. In the gray hour before first light, Clara sat at the table and opened the ledger to the section on Sheriff Caulfield. She read it through twice. Then she found the entry on Daniel Merritt and read that too. Leverage, maintain. The notation looked different in the pre-dawn gray than it had in the mountain cabin. More deliberate, more cold. Not a passing thought, a policy, a decision made and recorded and kept. She was still looking at it when Cole came and sat across from her. He'd seen it before. He looked at it again now, briefly, and looked away. "When this is over," he said, "I want to burn that book. After the territorial marshal photographs every page of it," she said. "After that," he agreed. She closed the ledger and set her hands flat on the cover. "Cole, the reason Hargrove knew we were coming for the ledger." She looked up. "I've been thinking about it all night." He waited. "Pritchett knew we'd been in the land office," she said. "He knew what we'd seen in the index. He reported to Hargrove that we'd been looking at the deed records. And Hargrove made the connection," Cole said slowly. "He knew I'd seen the ledger once. He knew that if we understood what the deed records meant, I'd eventually tell you about it. He didn't need a specific informant." He paused. "He just needed to be smart enough to anticipate the next move." "Which he was. Which means we didn't have a betrayal," Cole said. "We had a man who was 3 steps ahead of us. Until we went north instead of east," Clara said. "He didn't anticipate Edgar." Something like warmth moved across Cole's face. 83 years old and still the most dangerous man in the Bitterroot. Clara almost smiled. "Almost. Let's go get your brother," she said. They came into the valley from the north as the sun broke over the mountains, which meant they came in with the light behind them, the town still mostly asleep, and Hargrove's men, if there were any on the north road looking into the glare. There were 2. Cole saw them first, 2 riders sitting their horses at the crossroads where the North Trail met the main valley road. Not moving, just sitting. He pulled up. Clara pulled up beside him. "They've seen us," she said quietly. "Yes, so we don't run." "No." He straightened in the saddle. "We ride past them like we belong here," which we do. He looked at her. "Keep the ledger inside your coat. If they stop us, you're a school teacher coming back from visiting a friend in the hills. And you, a cowhand heading to work." He looked at the 2 riders. "Let me talk." They rode forward. The 2 men watched them come without moving. One of them was the broad-chested man in the heavy coat, the one who had stepped into the road in front of Clara weeks ago and told her Hargrove thought she'd be happier somewhere else. He recognized her. She could see it. "Merritt," the coated man said. His eyes moved to Clara and back. "Morning," Cole said. Easy, unhurried, the voice of a man with nothing to explain. "Mr. Hargrove's been looking for you. I heard." Cole kept his horse moving at the same steady pace. "Tell him I'll be by this afternoon." A pause. The coated man's eyes moved to the shape of Clara's coat. She kept her face neutral and her hands loose on the reins. "He said now," the coated man said. "I've got something to finish first." Cole didn't stop, didn't speed up, just kept riding past them the way a man rode who was accustomed to setting his own schedule. Clara rode beside him and did not turn her head and did not breathe fully until they had covered 200 yards and the sound of the 2 horses behind them had not come. "They're watching us," Cole said very quietly. "I know. Someone will be riding to Hargrove right now." He calculated silently. Clara did the same. 20 minutes before Hargrove knows we're in the valley," Cole said. 30 before he can get men to the jail. Then we have 20 minutes. 18, he said. "Let's go." They didn't run the horses. Running horses drew eyes in a town just waking up. They moved fast and purposeful, the way people moved when they had a reason but not a crisis, and reached the county jail at the east end of the main street in 11 minutes. Sheriff Caulfield was already there. He was standing outside the jail door with his thumbs in his belt and the look of a man who had been told to expect company and had decided to meet it on his own terms. He watched them ride up with the patient expression of someone holding all the cards and aware of it. "Miss Ashworth," he said. "Merritt." He looked at Cole. "You've had quite a night from what I hear." Cole dismounted. Clara stayed on the horse. "I want to see my brother," Cole said. "I'm afraid that's not possible right now." Caulfield paused, constructing the next sentence at a leisurely pace. "Daniel is being transferred to the county medical facility this morning. Mr. Hargrove's arranged for a specialist. Very generous of him." The words landed like a trap closing. Clara felt the cold move through her. This wasn't Caulfield improvising. This was Hargrove's contingency, activated before dawn, the moment the ledger disappeared from that mountain cabin. Daniel wasn't being helped. Daniel was being moved somewhere Hargrove controlled completely. "When?" Cole asked. His voice was absolutely level. "Wagon's being arranged now. Then I want to see him before he goes." Cole took one step forward. "Just one. That's territorial law, Sheriff. A prisoner's right to visitation before transfer. You know it as well as I do." Caulfield looked at him, looked at Clara, back at Cole. The territorial law Cole had cited was real. Clara had made certain of that 2 nights ago at Edgar's table, going through everything she knew about prisoner rights in the territory. Caulfield couldn't deny it without exposing himself as operating outside his legal authority, which, given what was in the ledger pressed against Clara's ribs, was something he had every reason to avoid doing in front of witnesses. 5 minutes, Caulfield said. "Alone," Cole said. "He's a sick man, Sheriff. Let him have 5 minutes with his brother without an audience." His voice was quiet and hard. "Whatever disagreement you and I have, Daniel Merritt is a 26-year-old man with bad lungs who hasn't done a wrong thing in his life. Give him that much." Something shifted in Caulfield's face. Not conscience. Clara didn't think conscience lived there anymore. Calculation. The calculation of a man who understood that how he treated a sick prisoner would be noted by witnesses, and witnesses had recently become a more complicated problem than they used to be. He stepped aside. Cole went in. Clara sat her horse and looked at Sheriff Caulfield, and Caulfield looked back at her. And the silence between them was the most honest conversation they'd ever had. "You should have left when you had the chance," Caulfield said. "I know you believe that," Clara said. "It would have been better for everyone. Not for the Morrisons," she said. "Not for the Pembertons. Not for Silas Bowen, who still can't stand fully straight." She kept her voice even. "Not for the families whose names are written in a ledger that is no longer where your employer left it." Caulfield's eyes changed. Not guilt. Fear. The specific, ugly fear of a man who understood exactly what she meant. "You're bluffing," he said. Clara looked at him steadily and said nothing. Cole came out of the jail in under 4 minutes. Behind him, walking slowly, wrapped in a blanket despite the summer morning, came a young man who was clearly his brother. The same dark eyes, the same set to the jaw, though his face was thinner, and the effort of walking showed in every careful step. Daniel Merritt was 26 years old, and he moved like someone who had been careful with his body for a long time because he couldn't afford not to be. He looked at Clara, then at Cole. "She's the teacher," Daniel said. His voice was thin, but his eyes were sharp. "Yes," Cole said. "You told me about her." Cole glanced sideways. "I mentioned her. You mentioned her 4 times in one letter." Daniel looked at Clara with the direct assessment of a younger brother who had been reading between his older brother's lines for years. "He said you were stubborn." "He's right," Clara said. He also said. Daniel started coughing. It bent him forward, and Cole's hand came to its back immediately. Steady and practiced, the movement of someone who had done this many times and was careful not to let his face show what it cost him every time. Later, Cole said quietly, when Daniel straightened. You can tell her later. Right now we need to move. Caulfield had not stopped them. He stood by the jail door with his hands at his sides and the look of a man running numbers that weren't adding up the way they used to. Merritt, Caulfield called. Cole stopped, didn't turn fully. Hargrove has done a lot for this valley, Caulfield said. He said it like a man reminding himself of something he'd once believed. I know what Hargrove has done for this valley, Cole said. It's in writing. He helped Daniel onto the horse behind Clara, took the reins himself and walked. Caulfield did not follow, did not call for help, did not do anything at all for a long moment. Then he went inside and sat at his desk and looked at the wall. They were at the Holloway place within the hour. May Holloway took one look at Daniel and had him on the good cot with a blanket and something hot before anyone had explained the situation, because May was a woman who processed crisis through action and questions came later. The boys were sent outside. The door closed. Clara laid the ledger on the table. Hargrove knows we have it, Cole said. He knows we've wired Helena. He looked at Clara. How long? 12 hours, she said. Maybe less. The marshal's office will move fast once they see what's in that wire. But Hargrove will move first if he can. May looked at the ledger, then at Clara. What does he do when he's cornered? He's never been cornered, Cole said. He escalates, Clara said. Both of them looked at her. Every time someone pushed back, he escalated, she said. Silas speaks up at the town meeting. Hargrove burns the Holloway barn. We go to the land office. He empties the mountain cabin and moves Daniel. He doesn't retreat. He increases the cost. She looked at the ledger, which means when he finds out the wire has been sent, he won't run. He'll come here. May absorbed that, set her jaw. My barn burned, May said. Her voice was controlled and quiet and terrible. My boys have been frightened for 3 months. My husband has been dead for 2 years. And I have wondered every single day since whether it was really the fever that took him or whether there was something else. She looked at Clara directly. Don't apologize for bringing this to my table. Give me a way to fight back. The room was very quiet. We need people, Clara said. I know exactly who to ask, May said. She was already standing, already moving. Don't go anywhere. What happened in the next 4 hours was the thing Clara would think about for the rest of her life when she needed to remember what people were capable of when they finally stopped being afraid. May rode to 7 farms. She didn't make speeches. She said, Hargrove's ledger is at my table. It has your name in it, and Silas Bowen's, and the Morrisons, and Garrett's. A territorial marshal is riding. Hargrove is coming. Come to the Holloway place if you've had enough. She was back in under 2 hours. She brought 12 people with her. Silas Bowen, who could not stand fully straight but stood anyway. The Miller family. 2 ranchers whose faces Clara recognized from the town hall meeting. The men who had said nothing while Hargrove spoke, and who had apparently been sitting with that silence ever since, waiting for a moment like this one. A woman named Grace Elroy, who had been keeping her own records in a journal under her floorboards for 16 months. Dates, incidents, descriptions, which she handed to Clara without ceremony and said, I didn't know who to give it to until now. And then last through the door, Aldous Pritchett. Clara hadn't expected Pritchett. He came alone, on foot, with his hat in his hands and the look of a man who had been running one particular calculation for a very long time and had finally arrived at his answer. He stopped in the doorway and looked at Clara. I know what you have, he said. My name's in there. Yes, Clara said. I want to talk to the marshal before anyone else does. I can't promise that. I can give you 4 names on the territorial land board, he swallowed. Not just the 2 in that ledger. 4. And I can give you the original deed documents, the real ones, before Hargrove had me alter them. I kept copies. He stopped. I kept them because I knew this day would come and I needed something to trade. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Sit down, Mr. Pritchett. He sat. Cole appeared at her shoulder. She felt him there before she heard him. You trust him? He said quietly. No, she said, just as quietly. But I trust what he's afraid of, and right now that's useful. The afternoon came in hot and long, and they waited. Daniel slept on the cot in the back room, and the sound of his breathing was the quiet around which the whole house organized itself. Cole sat near the back room door and didn't pretend he was doing anything other than listening to his brother breathe. Clara sat beside him. He's going to be all right, she said. You don't know that. I know he made it this far. She looked at the closed door. And I know he has the same jaw as you, which suggests the same stubbornness, which means he's not going anywhere without a fight. Cole looked at her. Something in his face that she was beginning to recognize, the expression he wore when something had reached him that he hadn't prepared a defense against. Clara, he said. She looked at him. I don't know how to. He stopped. Started again. I'm not a man who has the right words, I know that. So I won't say them wrong. He looked at his hands. But I want you to know, whatever happens today, what you've done for Daniel, for this valley. He looked up. I won't forget it. Good, Clara said, because I'm not finished yet. The sound came from the road, not horses' voices first. The low, collective sound of a group of people arriving with a purpose. May appeared in the doorway of the back room, and her face was the face of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this and was not afraid of it. "He's here," she said. "Wade Hargrove, and he didn't come alone." Cole stood, the room stood. Clara picked up the ledger from the table and held it against her chest. She thought about Rosie Morrison's shoe on the porch steps, about Wyatt Holloway's bruised jaw, about Silas Bowen's grip on her hand outside the town hall, how thin and desperate that gratitude had been, how much it had cost him just to say thank you. She thought about Edgar Finch saying, "I've been waiting for someone with a reason." She thought about Cole stepping out of the tree line on a dark road with a rifle and one word, and how wrong she had been about what kind of man he was. She walked to the front door. Cole was beside her. Wade Hargrove stood in the yard of the Holloway farm with 6 armed men behind him and the last of the afternoon light on his silver temples. For the first time since Clara had met him, the warmth was completely gone from his face. What was underneath it was not dramatic or theatrical. It was simply cold, the cold of a man who had made a decision about how a problem needed to be finished. He looked at the open door, at Clara, at the ledger. His jaw tightened. "Miss Ashworth," he said, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Clara looked at him across the yard. "No," she said clearly. "I have something that belongs to the territory of Montana and to Silas Bowen, and to the Morrisons and the Pembertons, and to the family of a man named Garrett, who died on a trail that witnesses say was perfectly safe." Hargrove's eyes moved to Cole. "Cole," he said, the voice of a man who still believed in the power of a name said a certain way. "You know what happens now?" "Yes," Cole said, "I do." He stepped out of the doorway and into the yard, not in front of Clara, but beside her, shoulder to shoulder. Present without replacing her. Hargrove looked at the 12 people standing in the doorway and yard. Farmers and ranchers, a land office clerk with copies of original deeds, a woman with 16 months of careful handwritten records. He looked at the ledger in Clara's hands. Something moved behind his eyes. A calculation. A door closing. He reached out and took hold of May Holloway's arm. May had been standing at the edge of the porch. Hargrove's hand closed around her wrist and pulled her forward, and one of his men raised his rifle and the barrel settled at May's shoulder, and the yard went absolutely silent. "The ledger," Hargrove said. His voice was quiet and final. "And Merritt comes with me and you." His eyes moved to Clara. "You're on the next stage east, tonight." Clara felt the cold of it move through her. She felt Cole go rigid beside her. She felt the weight of the ledger in her hands and the weight of every name written in it. Garrett, the Morrisons, the Pembertons, Silas Bowen, Daniel Merritt. And she felt, underneath all of it, something that was not fear and not anger, but something older and quieter and completely immovable. She looked at May. May looked back at her, and in May's eyes, even now, even with a rifle at her shoulder, was not a plea. It was something closer to permission. The look of a woman who had already decided, long before this moment, what she was and was not willing to surrender. Clara did not move. She did not lower the ledger. She stood in the doorway of the Holloway house and looked at Wade Hargrove across the yard and held his gaze with the full, steady weight of everything she had come to this valley to do. "No," she said. One word. The same way Cole had said it on a dark road weeks ago. No raised voice, no trembling, no negotiation attached to it. Hargrove stared at her. The sound came from the north road. Horses, multiple horses. Coming fast, coming hard, the sound of animals being ridden with urgency and purpose. Hargrove turned, his men turned. Every head in the yard turned toward the north end of the main street. 4 riders coming down from the ridge road. Hard riding. A badge catching the afternoon light on the lead rider's coat. The seal of the United States Marshal's office, visible from 50 yards. Marshal Declan Holt had been closer than any of them had hoped. Already riding toward the Bitterroot on an older complaint, Edgar's wire had found him on the road and turned him south. He had ridden through the night. Hargrove looked at the marshal, looked at his 6 men, looked at the 12 people standing in the yard and doorway of the Holloway farm, looked at the ledger in Clara's hands. His grip on May's arm loosened, then released. May stepped away from him, walked calmly back to the porch, and stood beside her boys. Hargrove's men looked at each other, then at their employer, then at the marshal riding into the yard with 3 deputies at his back. Hargrove did not run. He did not shout. He did not make any of the dramatic gestures that lesser men made when the walls closed in. He looked at Cole. For a long moment, the look of a man reviewing and accounting, trying to find where the numbers had gone wrong. Then he looked at Clara, and she understood in that look that he had genuinely not believed she would stay. Not really, not through all of it. He had run his calculations, and the schoolteacher from St. Louis had not been a variable he had weighted correctly. Marshal Holt dismounted and looked at Clara. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Marshal Holt. I received a wire from Helena regarding a ledger." Clara held it out. "Every page is in his hand," she said. "There's a land office clerk inside who can provide corroborating documentation and a journal from one of the local residents with 16 months of dated incident records." Holt took the ledger, opened it, looked at the first page, closed it. Then he looked at Hargrove. "Wade Hargrove," he said. He didn't raise his voice. "You'll come with me." Hargrove said nothing. He walked to the marshal's horse and stood to be cuffed, and he did not look at anyone again. Not at his men, not at the assembled valley people, not at the ledger in the marshal's hand. He looked once at Cole Merritt standing in the yard with the afternoon light on his face. The look lasted 2 seconds, then Hargrove turned away and did not look back. The 6 men behind him let their guns stay on the ground and looked at each other with the quiet individual expressions of men who understood which way the day had gone and were making rapid calculations about their own futures. May Holloway walked out into the yard and looked at the space where Hargrove had been standing. Then she looked at Clara. "My husband," she said. "Can we find out?" "Yes," Clara said. "Pritchett has records, we'll find out." May nodded, pressed her lips together, stood straight. Wyatt Holloway came around from the back of the house where he'd been listening with his brother, and looked at his mother and then at the mounted marshal and then, finally, at Clara. "Is it done?" he asked. Clara looked at the ledger in the marshal's hand, at Hargrove walking toward the marshal's horse, at Silas Bowen standing in the yard with his battered face and his whole body held carefully and the look of a man who could not quite believe what he was seeing. "Not completely," she said honestly. "There'll be a trial. There's work still to do." She looked at Wyatt, but the worst part is done. Wyatt looked at the yard for another moment. Then he said, "Can I come back to school on Monday?" Clara felt something break open in her chest, the good kind of breaking, the kind that made room. "Monday," she said. "Bring Cal." Toward the end of the afternoon, after Holt had taken his statements and his prisoner and ridden north, and after the yard had slowly emptied of people making their way back to farms and families, with the particular lightness of those who had set something down they'd been carrying too long, Clara found Edgar Finch standing at the edge of the property. She hadn't known he'd come. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. He had simply ridden 12 miles through the night, tied his horse at the fence line, and stood at the back of the assembled crowd with his rifle at his side and his hat on straight and the patient expression of a man finally closing an account he'd been keeping for a very long time. "You came," she said. "I started something," Edgar said simply. Seemed right to see it finished. He looked at the scorched ground where the barn had been, at May's house quiet now in the fading light. 30 years in these mountains," he said. "I've seen men like Hargrove before. They always think the country belongs to them because they got there first and pushed the hardest." He was quiet for a moment. "They're always wrong. The country doesn't belong to anyone. It just decides who deserves to stay." He touched the brim of his hat to Clara, walked to his horse, and rode back into the mountains without another word. The trial was set for November in the county seat, and the summer and fall between Hargrove's arrest and the first day of proceedings was the strangest season Clara had ever lived through. Strange because it was both harder and quieter than anything that had come before. The crisis had a shape, a beginning, a middle, a night ride through mountains with shots behind them and a ledger pressed against her ribs. But the aftermath had no clean shape at all. It was paperwork and depositions and the particular exhaustion of people who had held themselves together under pressure, finally allowing themselves to come apart now that the pressure had eased. Silas Bowen sat in Clara's classroom 3 days after Hargrove's arrest, folded into one of the student chairs with his big frame too large for it, and wept without apology for about 4 minutes. Then he wiped his face and said, "My grandfather homesteaded that land. I thought I was going to lose it." Clara sat in the chair beside him and said nothing and let him have it. That was all he needed. May Holloway didn't cry. May threw herself into the work of reconstruction with a ferocity that was almost frightening to witness, organizing the return of the Morrison and Delacroix families, coordinating with Marshal Holt's office on the deed restoration process, managing the informal network of Valley families who were simultaneously relieved and furious and didn't quite know what to do with either feeling. She came to Clara every few days with a list of questions and left with answers, and she never once said thank you, which Clara had come to understand was May's particular form of respect. May didn't thank people she considered equals. The Morrison family's deed was restored in October. They came back to the valley on a cold, clear morning, and Clara was there when their wagon came down the road. Young Rosie Morrison jumped from the back before the wagon had fully stopped and ran to the schoolhouse and pressed her face against the window to see if her desk was still there. It was. Clara had made sure of that. Wyatt and Cal were back in school on Monday as promised. They came in with the particular alertness of boys who understood that something significant had changed and weren't yet sure what it meant for them. But they sat at their desks and opened their readers, and that was enough for now. 2 weeks after Wyatt and Cal, Rosie came through the door. Clara put her reader back on her desk. Rosie sat down and opened it to page 47 and looked up at Clara with eyes that were too large and too complicated for a child's face. "We've been waiting for you," Clara said. "That was a good day." Daniel Merritt was in Helena. Cole had taken him there himself, in a wagon fitted with blankets against the autumn chill the week after the arrest. The Dr. Marshall Holt had recommended was a young man from Philadelphia who had come west for reasons that seemed to involve equal parts medical conviction and a genuine love of difficult country, and who turned out by all accounts to be genuinely skilled. His letter to Cole 3 weeks later said that Daniel's lungs were damaged but not destroyed, that careful management and the right altitude could stabilize his condition significantly, that Daniel Merritt was not a man who was dying. He was a man who needed to be careful. Cole had read that letter standing in the Holloway yard, where Clara happened to be talking with May. She'd watched him read it, watched the stillness move through him, not the controlled stillness he wore as armor, but the other kind, the stillness of a man receiving something he hadn't allowed himself to hope for, and not quite knowing what to do now that it had arrived. He'd folded the letter, put it in his pocket, looked up and found Clara watching him. He'd crossed the yard, held the letter out. She read it, handed it back. "Good," she said. "Yeah," he said. He went back to helping with the fence line along May's east pasture because that was what Cole Merritt did when the world became too large. He fixed something. Clara understood it. She had her own version. When things felt too large, she graded papers. They were alike in this, she and Cole, in ways she hadn't expected when she'd first watched him walk away from her in the dark outside the town hall, and thought him the most self-contained person she'd ever met. He wasn't self-contained, he was careful. There was a difference. The trial itself lasted 11 days, 14 counts. The verdict came back on a Thursday afternoon in November, when the mountains had their first snow on them and the valley below was still brown and waiting. Guilty on all 14, land fraud, conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and 1 count of criminal negligence in the death of a man named Garrett whose horse, it turned out, had not been fine on that trail at all. A fact that 3 witnesses finally felt safe enough to say out loud in open court, with a federal judge listening and writing it down. Pritchett received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation and the original deed documents he'd kept hidden for years under his own floorboards, a detail that said something about the particular guilt of a careful man. He left Copper Falls 2 days after the verdict and did not return. Caulfield resigned his star before the trial concluded. He left quietly, without drama, the way men left who understood that staying would only make things worse. The valley got a new sheriff in December. A younger man from the Northern Territory who had read every page of the investigation report before he applied for the position and arrived with the careful alertness of someone who understood exactly what the job had cost its previous occupant. The Territorial Land Board was restructured. The judge in Helena who had been quietly ensuring that any legal challenge to Hargrove's acquisitions reached his docket resigned before the investigation concluded. 2 federal inquiries opened in the new year, both of which had their roots in a ledger found beneath a loose floorboard in a mountain cabin, carried down through the dark on 1 horse by 2 people who had made the decision not to be stopped. Edgar Finch attended the verdict alone. He rode 12 miles each way and told nobody he'd been. Clara found out from Marshal Holt, who had spotted him at the back of the courtroom, hat on straight, arms folded, watching with the expression of a man finally settling a debt that had been outstanding for a very long time. The evening after she heard that, Clara sat behind the schoolhouse on her upturned crate in the last of the autumn light and thought about Edgar in that courtroom. Thought about what 30 years in these mountains must feel like, watching a man like Hargrove take what he wanted and finding no way to stop it. Thought about him pressing that folded survey map into her hand and saying, "Been waiting for someone with a reason." She heard footsteps she recognized. Cole sat beside her without asking. She didn't look up. "Holt told me about Edgar," she said. "I know. He told me too." A pause. 12 miles each way. Didn't say a word to anyone. "Sounds like someone else I know." He said nothing, but something shifted in the air beside her. She set down the papers she'd been holding and looked at him. The evening light was the color of old copper, laying itself across the mountains in broad flat sheets, and Cole Merritt was sitting beside her with his hat in his hands, and the expression she'd come to understand was his version of everything words couldn't quite hold. "Clara," he said. She waited. "I lost someone," he said, "before. A woman I was going to marry, stage robbery 4 years ago. She was killed." He said it plainly, the way he said hard things, not wrapped up, not softened, just placed down between them like something that needed to be seen. "After that, I went into the mountains and stayed. Because it was easier than all of this." He gestured slightly at the town, at the valley, at the space between them. People, things that matter and can be lost. Clara held his gaze and didn't say anything soft. He didn't want soft. He wanted to be heard. "I worked for Hargrove because it required nothing from me," he continued. "It was simple, brutal eventually, but simple. No one needed me to be anything other than a man who could fix a fence and keep his mouth shut." He paused. "And then you came and stood up in that meeting and said what no one else would say. And I thought, God help you, because I meant it. I thought you were going to get yourself killed." "I nearly did," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. "But you also made it so I couldn't stay in the simple place anymore. Because you needed someone, and the someone who could help was me. And I couldn't look at what you were doing, at what it cost you, and go back to mending fences for a corrupt man just because it was easier." He exhaled slowly. "You made me remember what I was supposed to be." The evening was warm enough still, here in the low valley, with the smell of pine and the last of the season's dry grass, and somewhere in the town a door closing, a child calling for supper. The ordinary sounds of a place going on with its life. "Cole," Clara said quietly. He looked at her. "I'm not done," she said. He held her gaze. "Ask me," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The hat turned once in his hands. Then he set it aside and took her hand, her left hand, with the careful, deliberate attention of a man who did nothing carelessly and intended to do this least carelessly of all. I don't have poetry, he said. I don't have speeches. What I have is this. I will show up every time. I will fix what's broken and carry what's heavy. I will stand next to you in any doorway you decide to walk through, regardless of what's on the other side. He looked at their joined hands, then up at her. That's what I'm offering. Clara thought about doorways, about the schoolhouse door on her first day with dried wildflowers on the desk and everything still possible. About the land office with Cole standing quiet near the door while she asked her questions. About the window of Hargrove's east study dropping her into the dark below. About the ridge above the mining cabin with shots coming from behind and one horse between them and everything they'd need to go on. About every doorway she'd walked through since St. Louis and who had been beside her for the ones that mattered. That's enough, she said. That's more than enough. He looked up. Yes, she said clearly. He sat with that for a moment, receiving it the way he'd received the letter about Daniel, with the stillness of a man who had not let himself expect something good and was now adjusting to the fact that it had arrived anyway. Then he brought her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips briefly, deliberately to her knuckles, a gesture so simple and so serious that Clara felt it settle into her like something that had always been meant to be there. There's a valley, he said after a while, north of here, 20 miles, good water, already a handful of families settling in. He looked at the mountains in the distance, the ones they'd ridden through together in the dark. No school, I know, she said. I've been writing to 2 of those families for 6 weeks. He turned to look at her. You've been planning. I've been considering, she said carefully. Considering doesn't commit anyone to anything. Something moved in his face, slow and real and better than any quick smile. Clara Ashworth, he said. I would very much like to commit you to something. You just did, she said. Ask me the rest of it. He looked at her. Then, without letting go of her hand, Spring, he said. After the deeds are all restored. After Daniel is stable through the winter. After the work here is finished. Spring, she agreed. I know a piece of ground up there, he said. South-facing slope. Good water year-round. Enough room for a house and a schoolroom both, with space left over. Is there space for a library? He looked at her with the full steady weight of a man making a promise he had no intention of breaking. I will build you a library with my own hands, he said, if that's what it takes. She looked at him for a moment, at the man who had stepped out of the dark with a rifle and no good options and a brother to protect and a grief he'd been carrying alone in the mountains for 4 years. At the man who repaired fences in the afternoon heat for families he didn't know anything to, and told the truth when it cost him, and held her hand to his mouth in the fading light with the simple seriousness of someone for whom no gesture was casual. I know you will, she said. From above them, from the half-built frame of what would become May Holloway's new barn, because May had started on it the week after the verdict and hadn't stopped. Wyatt called down without looking up from the board he was fitting. Are you 2 going to sit there all evening, or can somebody hand me that hammer? Cole stood, picked up the hammer, looked down at Clara. She smiled, he smiled back, the real one, the slow one, the one that had been assembling itself piece by piece since the first night on the dark road and was now finally complete. He went up the frame. Clara walked back toward the schoolhouse, the autumn light long and amber behind her, the mountains to the west going purple in the early dark. She thought about the night she'd arrived in this valley with everything she owned in one trunk and 3 armed men, and a road that hadn't seemed to lead anywhere good. She thought about a stranger who'd stepped out of the dark and said one word and turned out to be the kind of man the world tried to use up and couldn't quite manage. She thought about all the empty desks that were full again, about Silas Bowen standing straight, about Rosie Morrison with her face pressed against the schoolhouse window, checking that her desk was still there, about Edgar Finch at 83 riding alone to a courthouse to watch something be made right that had been wrong for a very long time, about Daniel Merritt in a Helena corridor saying someone has to keep pulling him back down, with his brother's slow smile and sharper eyes, about May Holloway saying, don't apologize for bringing this to my table, give me a way to fight back, about Cole Merritt saying I will show up every time and meaning it the way men meant things when they'd already proven it before they said it. She sat at her desk, opened her grade book, picked up her pen. Outside, the sound of the barn frame going up, hammer on timber, the solid purposeful sound of something being built. Wyatt's voice, Cal's answering laugh. Cole's low direction cutting through it all, steady and calm and present, the way he was present in everything he chose to put his hands to. The mountains darkened in the west. The first star appeared above the highest peak. Spring was coming eventually the way it always did in mountain country, slow and certain and worth waiting for. The valley was healing. And Clara Ashworth, who had come to Montana with a trunk and a teaching contract and the stubborn conviction that silence in the face of wrong was its own kind of wrong, sat in the school she had refused to abandon and understood with the full and quiet certainty of a woman who had earned it, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The hard part was finished, the good part was just beginning, and this time she did not face it alone.